Well, no Rob Dawson with us this week in the studio because he's in Berlin for something that will go in depth next time. Rob, what can you tell us about why you're there?
Well, it's not a holiday before you start having a go at me. It's international break, but I am still working on a feature that hopefully will be out in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll get to talk about on the pod next week.
Bit defensive, that, wasn't it?
A little bit, yeah, very secretive. He's in Berlin. It's the city of subterfuge and espionage and all sorts of strange stuff.
Well, since we were all asked together, Manchester United have announced plans to knock down Old Trafford and build a new 100,000-seater stadium on the same site with 200-metre tall towers and a concourse twice as big as Trafalgar Square. All of this came a day after owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe did broadcast interviews with The Overlap and the BBC, where, amongst other things, he claimed the club would go bust by Christmas and name-check specific first-team players as not good enough. Rob, you were at the launch. Tell us what it was like, especially given it came after these interviews, which generated quite a few headlines by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite surreal in that sense, because you're right. You know, the 24 hours earlier, Sir Jim Ratcliffe had been all over the news and broadcast stations telling everyone that the club would go bust by Christmas if he hadn't put his own money in. And then suddenly the following day, they're talking about building a stadium that could run to sort of £2 billion. You know, those two things obviously don't go hand in hand. And, you know, it took an awful lot of kind of explanation from some of the United bosses who were there, Omar Barada in particular, to talk about how this is even possible. Because, you know, while we were all sat in this room looking at these fancy pictures of this new stadium, 100,000-seat stadium in Manchester, you know, quite striking images. Once you get down into the detail, there are an awful lot of questions. And the number one question is about finance. You know, how are they going to pay for this? How are they going to pay for this and continue to invest in the squad and get United competing again? Because obviously they aren't at the moment. How long is this going to take? You know, is this necessary for Man United to be among the top clubs in Europe going forward? You know, that while it was kind of striking to sit in the room and you know, have all these kind of images flashed in your face, there were an awful lot more questions than answers by the end of it.
I thought it was quite interesting that Omar Barada, in one of his interviews, he talked about the way he framed it was, we're pleased to support the government's regeneration plan for the area, which made it sort of pretty transparent that they're relying on government funding to some extent. I mean, how influential, how significant is government or potential taxpayer money going to be to this project?
Well, United are insistent that they aren't going to ask for taxpayer money for the stadium. But you're right, the stadium is part of a wider regeneration project for that area of Manchester. Now, those regeneration projects that the government are looking at haven't been completely signed off. They are looking at Manchester as one of those projects, but you're talking about an awful lot more conversations that have to happen before that's actually a reality. Now, the one key thing that Omar Barada said to us in our briefing after the cameras were switched off was that the stadium doesn't make sense without the wider regeneration project. Now, this isn't United saying we are going to build a stadium regardless of what happens elsewhere. This is United saying we will build a stadium as part of this wider project. And if the wider project doesn't happen, the stadium won't happen. That's essentially what Barada said. Now, he's not specifically asking for taxpayer money for Man United's new stadium because he knows that would go down like a lead balloon. You know, taxpayers in Manchester aren't going to want to fund the stadium, but it has to be part of, according to Barada, it has to be part of this wider project. If the project doesn't happen, the stadium's not going to happen.
I mean, this is part of the thing, isn't it? The government funding is key, but the whole Wembley the North project, which Ratcliffe's talking about, it's more than just a stadium. So we've all been to Wembley, and if you look at Wembley 10 years ago when it had just been built, the surrounding area was basically not far of a wasteland. It was car parks. There was nothing there. Now there's residential, there's hotels, there's all sorts of there's retail, and that's the idea that the surrounding area of Old Trafford will become like Wembley is right now, with lots of living space, lots of retail, lots of event places. And that's the idea, that having a stadium there would enable the rest of the area to sustain itself, which, you know, that's their thought process. And I've seen a figure of 17,000 houses or living spaces will be part of this project. Now, if you sell 17,000 housing spaces for an average of £100,000, that's almost £2 billion, which is the cost of the stadium now. So you can see where the numbers come up. But United have stressed, like Rob said, that they aren't expecting the taxpayer to fund the stadium. It's the surrounding area. But there are two contrasting examples in the Premier League. So we've got Man City and West Ham who are basically playing in taxpayer-funded stadiums at a very low cost to the clubs themselves, rent or just annual costs. And Arsenal, Tottenham. Arsenal, I think they're still paying for the stadium. Well, it certainly took a long time. It crippled the club for a long time.
But they had a property play with that as well.
And Tottenham, as well, having to pay for it. So I think what United want to avoid is being in the situation where it's weighing down the club for a long time. A club that's already got £1 billion worth of debt, by the way. But obviously they're not going to get a free stadium like Man City and West Ham did.
Is it possible that... Because one of the things that Arsenal did to sort of fund that move to the Emirates was redevelop their old ground hybrid and turn it into flats and then sell them off. Could United do that, Rob, with Old Trafford?
That's certainly not something that came up in the briefing that we went to in London. I mean, one of the key questions is what happens to Old Trafford. There was a plan at one stage to redevelop Old Trafford and turn that into a 100,000 seat stadium. They decided that was going to be too expensive. So they want to build the stadium on the same site as Old Trafford, but not on the same footprint, which then, leads to questions about what happens to the actual stadium. Now, again, there was plans at one stage to reduce the capacity of Old Trafford, have it as a kind of a youth team stadium or a women's stadium, in the way that City have got a separate stadium on their CFG campus. Again, that was not that because they didn't feel it was cost effective. At the moment, the plan for Old Trafford is to bulldoze it, to keep the historical artifacts that are there, like the Munich clock, parts of the Munich tunnel, even parts of the original tunnel that survived bombing during the Second World War. But apart from that, the plan is to knock it to the ground. But because it's on the same site, you're talking about using the site of Old Trafford as part of this kind of regeneration project, or having it as a plaza for Man United fans, because it's so close. I mean, the plans that we saw, and I have to stress at this point, the plans that we saw are a concept. The images that fans have seen are not necessarily what that stadium is going to look like. It's just a concept right now. But the plans that we saw had the new stadium built right up against Old Trafford, to the point where one of the stands is almost directly behind where the Stretford end is now. And so, you talk in terms of, could you sell it off for housing? Well, probably not, because it is part of the same footprint. And the footprint for a stadium this size is quite small. They're going to have to use every single available bit of space on that site to make these plans come to a reality.
Rob, did they explain at all why they couldn't redevelop Old Trafford in its existing form? Because obviously, Beth's with us and she goes to Anfield all the time, and Liverpool have done a brilliant job of transforming what was a kind of a tired old stadium into one of the best stadiums in Europe. They stayed where they are. The stadium is now extremely atmospheric, and it's a fantastic situation. I'm sure they'll get the Kenny Dalglish stand done at some point as well. So why couldn't Old Trafford be modernised and upgraded?
Well, a lot of fans would like that because they are traditionalists and they want to play in the same stadium. And I've seen what Liverpool have managed to do with Anfield. What United have said is that the reason they couldn't redevelop Old Trafford is because you would have to knock down so much of it that for a lot of the games, or for a lot of time, they would have to play with a reduced capacity. In actual fact, you would probably have to look for somewhere else to play while you were redeveloping Old Trafford. And there just were no other options. You couldn't possibly have United playing at Man City. You couldn't have them playing at Liverpool. There are no other options really in
Rob,
Manchester.
See what they could have done, right? They could have played at Wembley for 2 years. They could have done a deal with the trains or the bus companies to subsidise travel to Wembley. 80,000 fans every week at Wembley for 2 years. It'd be hard to take, but for 2 years you actually swallow it, play at Wembley for 2 years, and it's subsidised, and then in 2 years' time you got the best stadium in the world on the existing Old Trafford. They could have done that. Absolutely could have done that.
Is there a sense, Rob, from the fans that there is frustration with the sort of the idea of essentially just bulldozing Old Trafford? Because I know, sort of as Mark said, from a Liverpool perspective, I think there is a real relief that the club went down the route of building it, of just redeveloping the stadium rather than moving to a completely different site. And you said there'll be a few features retained, but for the most part, it is going to be a completely new stadium. From speaking to fans and the sense in the United camp, is there a sense of it's a bit of a shame that that's happening?
I think so. I mean, the fact that the club did go through a full consultation process, so they did speak to a lot of fans, and they said that the majority of the fans voted for a new build stadium. Now, I think a lot of Man United fans look at this as a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity. Do you make a really hard choice to knock down Old Trafford and build a fantastic new stadium that kind of meets your commercial needs for the next 100 years, or do you try and put money back into Old Trafford, redevelop it and get that up to standard. Now, I must say that a lot of the fans voted for that, I think, because the club from very, very early on badged it as the best option was to build a new stadium. They told fans that a redevelopment would cost more money, it would take more time, it would probably mean playing games away from Old Trafford, it would probably mean playing games off Old Trafford with a reduced capacity, which would hit their match day revenue and in turn affect PSR. So everything that the club pumped out was aimed at building a new stadium, because really the most important thing about this is what Jim Radcliffe wants. And Jim Radcliffe was very, very clear from the minute that he came in that his priority was to build a new stadium. Now, they had to go through that fan consultation because they had to be seen to be speaking to the fans. And obviously the fans have given the club the answer that they wanted. But I can't help think that maybe some of the narrative around this has led fans to believe that that's what they wanted, and they wanted a new build rather than have a situation where they were redeveloping Old Trafford. But there are still traditionalists who would like it, who would like to stay on the same footprint. And Liverpool have shown that it is possible, because they're going to play in essentially what is a brand new stadium, but on the same site with all the history that goes along with it.
The sense I get is that the split amongst United fans is there, but I think the majority do seem to want to move. That's the sense I get, because I think they've, like Rob said, they believe, they've seen how tired Old Trafford has got. I mean, it has become a very tired stadium, and I think they're so fed up with it, they want a new stadium. But then, I was at the Bernabeu recently when they played Man City, and it's just an amazing stadium. It's the best stadium in Europe. I'm sure that Barcelona's will be great as well, the new camp. So Barca, Real Madrid and Liverpool have both been able to regenerate their existing stadiums, but there are issues with Old Trafford in terms of the design, and the railway's an issue as well. So I guess, the future is there for Man United to grasp, but the issue is, if you're a Man United fan, would you trust the current ownership, so Jim Radcliffe, the Glazers, to get this right?
Well, speaking of that, Rob, I did want to touch on the interviews that Jim Radcliffe has done, because I've been long sort of arguing that owners should do more, right? We don't hear enough from the owners of clubs. I spoke to Josh Kroenke last summer, but that was a product of a couple of years of trying to convince Arsenal and the Kroenkes to do it. What did you make of the interviews that he gave? Because from my sort of take on it from afar was, on one hand you sort of think, well, fair play to him. He didn't seem to think that any topic was off limits, but then some of the answers were quite alarming in sort of revealing perhaps some fuzzy thinking or a lack of clarity on certain things. What did you make of it, Rob?
I mean, the first, you've made a good point there, that a lot of football fans will say that they want communication from their owners. And it's one of the big criticisms of the Glazers, that when they came in 2005, they said they were going to communicate and they never did. So you can't fault Jim Radcliffe getting in front of the cameras and taking questions. So that's the first thing. You can't criticise him for doing it. Beyond that, I agree. I thought some of the answers were a little bit strange. He is in a difficult position in that lots of Man United fans will understand that the reason United are in this financial mess is the Glazers. But the Glazers are Sir Jim Radcliffe's business partner, and he can't be seen to go on camera and start slaughtering his business partner. I think everyone could understand why that is a very, very difficult position for him to be in. When he starts talking about the squad, I didn't think it was particularly advisable to start talking about the likes of Onana, Højlund, Casemiro as players that they're still playing for in the summer, as a kind of way to point at these players and say, look at the mess we've kind of inherited, look at the players we're having to deal with. He said this in what essentially was United's biggest week of the season against ahead of that Real Sociedad game in the Europa League. So in terms of what that did to the dressing room and squad morale, Amorim said it didn't matter, but I can't help but think that the players must have looked at that and thought, really, is that really the best thing you can be saying?
I disagree on that, Rob. I think that, as we know, I think we've both reported on the situation United face in the summer with the financial matters, and a lot of fans just don't believe it. They don't believe that United are in a position, and I think you explained perfectly that before we spend a penny this summer, we've got to spend £87 million re-signing these players that we paid for.
I thought it was incredible that he just gave that number out.
Well, exactly.
Because that is sensitive information
I suppose
that
now
every club has got. That they know that if United are in the market for a player or they're trying to buy one of United's players, they know that figure's really key to what they can spend.
It's no secret. It's amortisation, isn't it? They break down the length of the contract. I mean, you can work out what they owe, but to put it like that to the fans know the situation. And I have no problem with him saying that they've overpaid for underperforming players, because it's true. There's some of the players in that dressing room, and they don't need protecting. They need to be kind of exposed for being that not delivering what they should be delivering. Now, I'm not saying it's Rasmus Højlund's fault that he's not good enough, because he didn't ask the club to pay close to £70 million for him, but he's there. I know he scored at the weekend, but he's underperformed and they overpaid for him. So he's only being honest. And yes, you're right, Rob, in the sense that it might not do well for the dressing room, but tough. Players have got to take it. To play for Man United, the expectations are really high. And if the owner says you're not delivering, well, if you're not delivering, he didn't say that about Bruno Fernandes. He praised him because Bruno Fernandes has delivered. So the simple equation is deliver, live up to your price tag and your wages, and you won't get criticised.
I think that the slightly alarming thing for me from the outside looking in, and I suppose that is the extension of it. And I do take your point, and I think, it is right. Sometimes fans call out players all the time, so the owners who have invested an awful lot of money in them should be well within the rights to be honest. And like you say, they shouldn't be coddled because, because you don't want to hurt the feelings. I do completely take that, but obviously, having done a fair bit on the women's side of the game, his comments sort of consistently about the women's team for me have been alarming. And I completely take the point that it is way down his list of priorities, and that maybe doesn't marry with sort of the ecosystem that we're in now, where we want equality. I understand that obviously the men's team come first, and the women's team is probably dependent a little bit on the success of the club in a wider sense, but it seems like he does sometimes speak without thinking. And you think, for someone who is in charge of one of the biggest football institutions in the world, he surely must have a team of PR people around him. So he's either not being well advised in that way, or he's not heeding that advice, which for me, if I was a United fan, would be a little bit of a worry.
Well, I know he was advised not to speak about the Glazers,
right,
and he kind of stayed to that a little bit, but I think he said a couple of things about the Glazers which kind of hint at what he really thinks. But he cleverly shifted the finger points at the Glazers to saying that the regimes of Ed Woodward and Richard Arnold were really bad. He said he wouldn't have kept Arnold or Woodward, and they were both appointed by the Glazers. So take your pick.
Rob, final word to you. I think obviously the mood around United has not been great for the majority of this season, if not all of it. Do you think this stadium announcement is going to change that a little bit? Is it going to create a bit of positivity that maybe Ruben Amorim and his players can feed off and try and finish the season on a high? Or is it just a completely different sort of matter altogether?
I think it's fair to say that the fans are split in terms of what the actual stadium looks like, but not the premise on which it's based. And so for an owner to come out and say, we are wanting to put United back among the best clubs in Europe, and this is what we need to do it, I think that suggestion has been welcomed. That, along with the money that's gone into Carrington to rebuild their training facility. All of these little things go down very, very well with fans. Now, you can get into the kind of nuts and bolts on whether the stadium looks nice or whether it doesn't, whether we're actually going to see it or not. But the one thing that Jim Radcliffe has done is kind of point towards what should be a brighter future. Now, that doesn't marry particularly with what's happening on the field, because, United is still in the bottom half of the table. I think the last couple of results have done wonders for Ruben Amorim, getting into the quarterfinals of the Europa League, beating Leicester. You can start to see a little bit of progress on the field when you start coupling that with what fans are hoping will be sort of progress off the field. Then there is kind of room to be optimistic. The only thing I would say about all of this is that it's talk. And we've seen United talk, and United are the best club in the world at talking, but not necessarily about doing. And so United fans want to see progress on the pitch with Ruben Amorim. They want to see progress in terms of recruitment in the summer with the players that they bring in, the players that they are able to get rid of. And they also want to see a shovel in the ground at Old Trafford and work starting on a new stadium. Because at the moment, all of this, Sir Jim Radcliffe, Ruben Amorim, all of it is talk. When it starts becoming action, then United fans can really kind of start getting behind it and start, looking towards what is a brighter future. Because at the moment, it does feel a little bit sort of doom and gloom. There are clubs all over Europe who are miles ahead of them. So United need to start making good decisions, taking small steps and moving forward. I think that's what United fans will settle for at the moment.
All right, Rob. Well, Auf Wiedersehen. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you back in the studio soon.